This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
For decades, Israel has been a target of terrorist attacks, with hundreds of innocent civilians losing their lives in bombings, shootings, and other acts of violence throughout the years. Despite the Israeli government's efforts to bring the perpetrators to justice, many of the masterminds behind these attacks have remained at large. Frustrated with the lack of progress, a group of terror victims and their families decided to take matters into their own hands and seek justice in international courts. This episode is the story of their fight for justice and the NGO that helps them in their pursuit. Shurat HaDin, a legal organization founded in 2003 by attorney Nitsana Darshan-Leitner, specializes in representing terror victims in legal actions against those who finance and support terrorism. Using creative legal strategies and a global network of lawyers, Shurat HaDin has won numerous cases against banks, governments, and other entities that have aided terrorist organizations. The organization also provides legal aid to Israeli soldiers and civilians who have been subject to lawsuits and legal harassment in foreign jurisdictions. Nitsana Darshan-Leitner, the founder of Shurat HaDin, is a prominent human rights lawyer and activist. In addition to her work with Shurat HaDin, she has authored Harpoon, Inside the Covert War Against Terrorism's Money Masters. The book offers an inside look at the covert operations used to disrupt terrorist financing networks and the legal and moral dilemmas involved in such operations. Through her work with Shurat HaDin and her writing, Darshan-Leitner has become a leading voice in the fight against terrorism, advocating for a comprehensive and proactive approach that targets the financial and logistical infrastructure of terrorist groups. We are super thrilled to have her on the show today.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. What a pleasure.
So, how did the idea come to be?
That happened in the beginning of the Intifada, the second Intifada in Israel, the year of 2000. Me and my colleague just finished law school, became lawyers, and we realized that perhaps there is a way for us as lawyers to take part in the fight against terrorism by doing what lawyers do best, go after the pocketbooks of the terror organizations. Indeed, it sounds unheard of. How can you go after a terror organization? What can you do to it? What would it care, etc.? But we felt that the entire terrorism is based on infrastructure that's based on money. Money is the oxygen for everything, including terrorism, and we were determined to choke it off. And we filed a couple of lawsuits against the Palestine Authority, against Hamas, Islamic Jihad,
Here in Israel?
Israel.
Okay.
And in the United States, yes, we filed lawsuits against Iran, Syria, for aiding and abetting terrorism. And after 2 years, we started winning in court. We received judgments for hundreds of millions of dollars. We received liens on terror finance. We received unprecedented decisions against the Palestine Authority, etc. And then we were approached by a special unit in the Mossad called Harpoon, headed by the legendary head of the Mossad, Meir Dagan, that asked us perhaps we can collaborate. They, in their different operations, accumulated a ton of information, documents, evidence that prove how the money really goes from United States, Syria, Lebanon, to the hands of the terror organizations in the West Bank and Gaza. And they said that it will be a waste not to use this information. Perhaps we can expand our activity and file more lawsuits against the terror organizations and take on the banks that provided the terror organization with financial patrons. We couldn't do it as private lawyers anymore, and we established Shurat HaDin, Israel Law Center, to take all these hundreds of cases and file them in orderly manner in the courts around the world.
And what happened? Like, I'm thinking the history of terror victims in Israel. It goes like the serious terror attacks, I guess, began in the 60s with the plane hijacks, and then you have the terror attack by this Japanese guy in the early 70s.
Right.
So for all those decades, and the first Intifada,
Right.
and the Oslo terror attacks, nobody came up with this concept?
No, it actually began in the end of the second Intifada, first Intifada, towards the beginning of the second Intifada, where there were special laws in the United States that were enacted to deal with terrorism on behalf of terror victims. The Anti-Terrorism Act that allowed American citizens that were killed or injured abroad to bring their cases in the United States against overseas terror organizations. So that brought to the ability to file lawsuits against the Palestine Authority or any terror organization. That was enacted in 1996. And also an exception for the Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act that says basically that a state-sponsored terrorism does not act as a sovereign state and therefore should not enjoy sovereign immunity.
Can you explain?
Yes. Usually you cannot file a lawsuit against a state. States have sovereignty immunity. This means that they cannot be sued in court. You cannot sue England or France and Israel. You cannot sue them in the States as well.
Okay.
But Congress decided that states that are designated as terror-supporting states are not acting as sovereign state and therefore should not enjoy sovereign immunity. And this is how you can file lawsuits against states that are listed on the watch list of the State Department, like Iran, Syria, North Korea, for aiding and abetting terrorism
in the U.S.
on behalf of American citizens in the U.S.
And then, but what is the outcome of such a lawsuit? Meaning, what's the end?
There is a judgment that the court grants in case you are able to prove that actually this sovereign state supported the terror organization or supported the terrorists. So, for example, all the suicide bombings that went on in the beginning of the second Intifada or towards the end of the first Intifada, you know, Machne Yehuda Market and Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, and bus number 18 and bus number 19 and 25, and all that, the Sbarro pizza place, and the Dolphinarium discotheque, you name it. All this were done by suicide bombers that belong to a certain terror organization. Sometimes it's Hamas, sometimes it's Islamic Jihad. If you are able to prove who's standing behind this terror attack, you can actually go after the country that supported this terror organization. So in the case of Sbarro, for instance, that was done by Hamas terrorists. First, you need to prove that it really was Hamas. And second, you have to prove that at that time, Iran supported Hamas. Once you pass through these stages, you have a judgment against Iran, and now you just need to collect it.
How?
So in the beginning, we found assets that belong to the Iranian government, bank accounts that are frozen in the United States, real estate. I would admit that the State Department did not like these cases, and it did not like the idea that the terror victims will receive money that is sitting in a bank account that belongs to Iran.
Why?
They wanted to keep the money for better days with Iran. They wanted to have a say what to do with the money. Okay. So we had to pass a legislation in Congress that overcame the objection of the State Department, and we are able to receive the money in the account and give it to the terror victim.
Well, that's interesting. I feel like we should pause there. What do you mean we were able to pass a legislation in Congress?
Yes.
Nitsana Darshan-Leitner, an Israeli citizen, passes a legislation in the United States Congress?
We did hire lobbyists to help us with that. But the idea was that after September 11, all the insurance companies were sued by the victims. And Congress wanted to pass a law that was pushed by the insurance companies to protect them and to limit the amount of the insurance to $1 million per victim instead of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in any case. We came to the insurance companies and told them that why don't they put in their law the idea that the victims can go first and foremost to the countries that are in charge of this terrorist attack, like Saudi Arabia, like Iran, like any other country that supported the terror organizations. This will limit their exposure and will limit the amount that they've had to pay to the terror victims. The insurance companies agreed, and this is how we passed the law.
Wow. So basically, after that law was passed, the United States officials or whatever, the government could demand of any kind of Iranian holdings in the United States to be released.
Yes.
Basically repossession or whatever of those holdings and then redistributed as payment to the victims.
Exactly. Like we found a house that belonged to the Persian Shah. Years ago, when the son of the Shah wanted to become a pilot, his father sent him to Lubbock, Texas, where they have a big Air Force base, and bought him a house.
That's so awesome. They just get to so you ran around the States looking for Iranian property, and we're like, that's ours.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and
how is there not a movie about this?
Good question. Did you get
soon to be? I hope.
Okay.
This should be a Netflix.
Yeah,
play.
Netflix show.
Yeah. We're able to seize the house and give it to terror victims. But Boeing, for instance, when they signed an agreement with Iran to sell them 80 aircrafts for $17 billion, we went to the court in Chicago. We put a lien on this deal between Boeing to Iran, and we told the court, we have a judgment against Iran. We are entitled to the Iranian money that will go in this deal or to the aircrafts.
Wow.
And the court approached the State Department because it was, too far-reaching. What do you mean you are entitled to the money or to the aircraft? And the State Department upheld our position and sided with us. And
so
said,
Boeing called off the deal, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah, the nuclear agreement was called off, and Boeing did not proceed with her agreement with Iran. But
it's a very recent incident.
Yes.
So Boeing was already heating up on the sideline to get the money from Iran as soon as the Biden government essentially will sign the deal with Iran, and that's amazing.
It was turned off because of the nuclear agreement was cancelled, but have not. This was going on, and in fact, they came to court and said we can't really let the terror victims receive any money because Iran will obstruct this deal, which will obstruct the entire nuclear agreement, because one of the conditions of the nuclear agreement back then in Obama's days was that the Boeing will be able to sell Iran these aircrafts. Mm-hmm. And despite all that, the State Department didn't care and let us continue with the case.
The law. Wait, so I have to, before, just like a quick stat, how much would you estimate, if it's easy to ballpark, how much would you estimate it till today, including sums that have yet to be claimed, has been by Shurat HaDin claimed for terror victims? So
far we are able to receive $2 billion in judgments.
What?
And we're able to seize $600 million in terror assets and to collect, actually to get into our hands, more than $400 million that went to the terror victims.
First of all, that's amazing, but it's also devastating to think the lives that all that money represents.
Yes. I always say that no money can bring back life, but money give a measure of compensations, a measure of justice to the terror victims. The terror victims agreed to play a role in this war. They agreed to revive the horrific terror attack that they were involved with in order to pursue justice. And
they were brought before jury, is what you mean?
Some of them were brought before jury. Some of them had to testify before a judge, a single judge. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy in any of these cases. And therefore, the compensation, at least in the United States, are very high, very significant. The court wants to show how upset it is and how outraged it is before these horrific terror attacks, and grants punitive compensations and also compensatory damages in a very high amount.
And it's important to say that this is all done by an NGO, meaning a non-for-profit, right?
Yes.
So this is like the lawyers who are working for Shurat HaDin are not taking a
But the lawyers you hire in America,
percentage.
Yes, lawyers that work on these cases, both in Israel and the United States and elsewhere, are not getting paid hourly rate because we can't afford it, the victims cannot afford it, but they do get compensations, a percentage, they work on contingency in the end of the day. Many cases do not come to a completion. They don't come up with a judgment, or even if you get a judgment, you don't collect. We have a case against the Palestine Authority that we won in the United States before a jury trial in 2015 on behalf of 10 American families of terror victims. And the judgment was for $655 million, really significant amount. But it was overturned in appeal. And we went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did not agree to reinstate the judgment. And we lost it only on a personal jurisdiction allegation. It was very technical argument.
it's a roller coaster.
It is. It is. In this case, we went back to Congress and, yes, passed another legislation that reinstates personal jurisdiction. It was a very interesting case. It still is, because the Palestine Authority claimed that we didn't have a right to file a lawsuit against it in the United States because there is no jurisdiction. The Palestine Authority
Is not a state.
is not a state, but is not active in the United States. There are no ties to the United States. Usually when you file a lawsuit against a defendant, you have to show that this is a proper jurisdiction, that the defendant lives in this place, knows the law of the place, can be aware of what's going on. The Palestine Authority said, I'm in Ramallah.
But they have an embassy in America.
Yeah, it's not an embassy of the Palestine Authority, but the PLO. It's a mission of the PLO. Yes, there is a difference when you come and go into details.
Wow.
So we are very, very upset. And we approached the State Department, or the court approached the State Department. The State Department said, no. Unfortunately, this law is unconstitutional and was invalid. So we went to Congress and told them there is a problem. There is a problem because we filed this lawsuit and litigated for 15 years based on a law that they enacted, a very well-intended law that allow American citizens to file their cases in the United States. It's an extraterritorial jurisdiction law, but now was canceled by the court for being unconstitutional.
This seems very relevant.
Yeah.
Yes. And they have to fix the problem.
Oh no.
Yes.
The parliament needs to fix the problem and change the law to override the Supreme Court?
Yes.
That's unheard of.
Yes. So what they did, or you see,
That's it's a dictatorship.
It happens in the United States, in the most democratic country in the world. And Congress agreed. And they said, if the Palestine Authority wants to continue receiving aid from the United States government, they have to agree to personal jurisdiction when it comes to terror victim litigation. So in the beginning, the Palestine Authority said that they don't want to receive any more aid from the United States government. That held for 1 year. Recently, they came back and said, we can't actually do without this $600 million financial aid that the United States is providing them.
Directly to the Palestine Authority.
Yes.
That's not UNRWA.
Right. UNRWA is $300,000 more. $300 million more. And now we are back. Now the Supreme Court ran down the case to the federal court to see whether, based on the behavior of the Palestine Authority by receiving money from the United States government, she should be perceived as someone that is agreeing to personal
I gotta say, that's also another beautiful bit about American law. Like, the Supreme Court, received back this case and then sent it down to the federal court to do the actual job of a court.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's-
because you can't hear evidence
Yeah.
in the Supreme Court. It's
That's
the
what
appellate
a
division.
court made up of people who actually care about justice. I would
anyway,
say sorry, not to get political, but
But to me, okay,
we can,
that's several
we can
just-
jump
just-
into
no, it
this
just-
in a different podcast.
yeah, but it rung to me like the fact that that's a very I think humble act on the part of people who that to me rings of justice. People who are saying this isn't our job. Now the Congress has passed another legislation. Please, the lower courts, do your job in figuring out this case. That's
Exactly.
to
But
me.
it stood out to me that you said, so if I got this correctly, almost $1 billion a year the United States gives the Palestinians.
Yes.
That's insane. That's insane. And
Yes. And you say this despite the incitement to terrorism and despite the support of terrorism and
Yeah.
despite the pay for slave policy and despite all that, they give them this money. The Taylor Force Act that was supposed to deduct any payments to the prisoners that were paid by the Palestine Authority from this money, from these grants that are given to the Palestine Authority, was basically cancelled by the Biden administration. And now they give them the full $600 million, no matter where the money goes to, no matter their policy of the pay to slave.
And UNRWA operates in Gaza. Do we
Yes.
know how much money ends up being?
We don't have details or information about money per se. We do know that the infrastructure and the facilities of UNRWA are used by the terror organizations not only during wars, where they use schools to hide missiles and rocket launchers, or they use ambulances or use cars of UNRWA, and obviously use places to or hospitals to hide the terrorists, but also in non-war period. They
So why not
just,
sue
collaborate.
UNRWA?
UNRWA has immunity. We're back to
come?
this question.
Also in Israeli courts?
Yes, by law.
Why?
UNRWA is a UN organization, and all the UN organizations are protected by immunity by law.
I have an idea then. Go to Congress and legislate a law which says
Seems
no
like
more
there's nothing Nitsana can't do.
no more immunity to the UN.
You know what? Now we are planning a lawsuit against UNRWA despite the immunity. It's unbearable.
It's too much, yeah.
It's too much.
It's
They're
too much
really
because
overreaching, really.
the bureaucracy, the
No, the support of terror.
They support.
so who? But
Yeah.
how are you going to overcome? Where? Are
Well,
you
I don't know
sue
if we're
them?
going to overcome it, but I must raise public awareness for this.
Saying just for the
wrongdoing.
PR, it's worth it.
Yes, and perhaps we'll find a way. We'll find a hole that we can perhaps go by. It's really unheard of. You can't have an entity that simply supports bluntly, openly, publicly a terror organization.
And another thing I want to ask you is, so first of all, I understand there's this separation between the Palestinian Authority and the PLO guys. If you don't know, it's the Palestine Liberation Organization, which became the Palestinian Authority, but I guess it didn't.
No, it did not. The PLO signed with Israel the Oslo Accords that created the Palestine Authority.
Yes.
Indeed, there is a parallel between the Palestine Authority to the PLO. The head of the Palestine Authority is the head of the PLO. The manpower is basically the same people. The facilities are the same. And yet, there are two different organizations, two different entities.
And who...
Sounds like a tax scheme. Like, no, it's my business. But you live there. But it's my business.
Yeah, well, the PLO consists all the different terror organizations in the Palestine Authority. the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, the Popular Democratic Front, the Fatah, 417th, all the different organizations are under one umbrella of the PLO. And this is different than the Palestine Authority that's supposed to run a government in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank. And just one of the things that they are helping is the PLO, among others.
And the PLO is, any of those entities are considered a terror organization in the United States?
Not anymore. The PLO received a waiver that the President of the United States signs every 6 months not to consider it to be a terror organization. This is only for the PLO. However, in the PLO itself, as I said before, there are terror organizations which are still designated and don't receive a waiver, like the Fatah, like the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine. All the terror organizations are still considered to be a terror organization. So you may ask, so what's the point?
Yeah.
I mean, if all the organs of the body are sick, how come the head or the body itself is kosher, is okay to deal with? But this is the United States. They wanted it to be able to sign the Oslo Accords. They wanted to have some relationship with the Palestine Authority. And therefore, they sign this waiver every year.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So
it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It really is. All the ins and outs, huh?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, what's the case that you feel like you're the proudest of, or that moved you the most? You know, a case that'll
Stood
stick
out
with you.
So I think this case of the $655 million is my best case yet. And I'm going to win it. I'm going to prove
power to you
that the Palestine Authority should perceive as expressing a consent for personal jurisdiction, and will win a judgment. Ultimately, the Solicitor General is on our side, and I know it will reach again the Supreme Court, and I'm pretty positive that we'll win the Supreme Court. But
yeah,
the ultimate case is just a recent case that we had in the Supreme Court of the United States against Google.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we started filing lawsuits against the social media companies back then in 2015 in the outbreak of the knife intifada in Israel, where Palestinians were grabbing knives and go and kill Jews. And when you went deep into the question why they're doing it, you realize that they are incited to kill. Incitement that took place on the social media. Posts and videos that illustrating how to kill, and encouragement to go and kill, and endorsement for terrorism, all on Facebook. Facebook was the most popular social media networks among the Palestinians, to the extent that Benjamin Netanyahu called the wave of terrorism the Facebook Intifada. And then he sent his ministers to meet with Facebook representatives and asked them to turn this assignment down, but Facebook refused. Facebook said that they are only a neutral bulletin board. They are not involved with the content, they are not involved with the users, and they have no intention to take this incitement down. So we decided to take Facebook to court, and we filed a $1 billion lawsuit against it in the federal court in New York on behalf of terror victims that were killed in the knife intifada in Israel. And Facebook obviously hired lawyers, came to court, and said that they are immune according to Section 230 to the Communication Decency Act. You're nodding, so you know what I'm talking about. This is a law that was enacted in 1996 to protect the internet, to let the internet flourish, to keep the internet open. And it basically says that social media networks and also internet servers should not be considered as publishers for a content that was put on their platforms by a third party. Section. They are not newspapers, they are not TV, they cannot be considered as publishers. And that grants them blanket immunity. They cannot be sued. We said it's not about content. We said the mere fact that Hamas has a Facebook page is a violation of the Anti-Terrorism Act, because according to this law, no American company is allowed to provide any sort of services to a designated terror organization. A bank is not allowed to open a bank account to Hamas or to Hassan Nasrallah. So why Facebook or Twitter will be able to open a page or an account to a leader of the Hamas or Hezbollah? But we lost the cases. The court said Section 230, blanket immunity, cannot be sued in court. We kept going. We said terrorism is not an Israeli problem, it's a global problem. And we started filing lawsuits on behalf of ISIS victims that were killed in the Paris attack, in the Brussels attack, in the Istanbul attack. And again, we lost the cases, Section 230, until we reached the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, for the first time, agreed to hear these cases. They took the case of Gonzalez versus Google. Gonzalez was a 24-year-old student, a daughter of American-Mexican family from LA, that received a scholarship to learn and study a semester abroad in Paris. And she sat in a cafe where ISIS carried out the attack in the concert of the death metal and shot her to death. She was only American that was killed in this attack. And we filed a lawsuit against Google because Google owns YouTube, and YouTube provided amazing support to ISIS with their beheading videos and all the other videos that ISIS screened for years on YouTube. So we had a hearing 2 weeks ago in the Supreme Court.
Wow.
It was fascinating. The Supreme Court...
Is this on YouTube, by the way? The hearing, I think, proceedings...
It was not on YouTube, but you can go on it and listen to it. The Supreme Court receives 8,000 cases a year and picks up only 80. 2 of them were ours, one against Google, one against Twitter, and other victims of ISIS. And for 2 days, the court sat and heard the cases. Usually a hearing takes 1 hour, 20 minutes for the defendant, 20 minutes for the plaintiff, and 10 minutes each for rebuttal. This time it took more than 3 hours each day. And the judges humbly said that perhaps they are not the 9 best experts for the internet. Perhaps they should not get involved. On the other hand, because of the implication, I mean, you rule against Google, you basically hit every company along the way, because it's not going to be only the social media companies, it will be all the companies that are based on algorithm, on knowledge, on recommendation, all the arguments that we raised in the hearing. And that will be a precedent that will affect the entire economy of the United States. Indeed, CNN define this case as the case that will blow up the internet, or the case that will bring the internet on its knees. On the other hand, the court knew that before Congress, there are 25 proposals for legislating and revisiting Section 230, because everybody knows now that the social media networks have algorithms, they have the tools, they have the ability to monitor content, and they should not be immune. And despite all this proposal, Congress did nothing, because the social media networks have tremendous lobby in Congress. Yeah. So it's up to the court now.
So we're waiting for their ruling, basically?
Yes. How does that work? How long does it take?
Probably they will come down with a decision in June.
Wow. That's crazy. And I didn't hear about it, which is also upsetting.
How much is Google being sued for?
Yes.
You're frustrated by that.
I am very frustrated. Yeah, in Israel, it did not make any headlines because Israel was extremely busy with the judicial reform. Nothing passed the radar. But in the United States, it was covered from wall to wall.
What were you asking?
That's amazing. No, it's just amazing that we didn't hear about it. How much are you suing Google for?
In this case, it will be $500 million.
Wow. And Twitter too?
And Twitter too. Twitter was
You're going on against Elon.
Well, it wasn't in his time.
Yeah, of
And yet he will have to pay the price. Should have taken it into consideration when he bought the company. Even though we know that
because
Twitter,
sorry, I'm cutting you, because on Twitter the first thing that stands out is Khamenei's
absolutely
account.
Absolutely,
it's insane. Is it
that's
in
the irony of the whole thing, or this is the absurd of the whole thing? How can you let Khamenei and other, and yes, we mentioned this specifically, and all the Iranian leaders who have accounts on Twitter? I mean, United States banned Iran, banned the Ayatollah, banned the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, and all this have accounts on Twitter, and they're free to use social media networks. It really makes no sense. And so one of the things we allege is that there should be an end from, not to define, not to separate, not to make a difference between each to another. Totally zero tolerance to terrorism on the internet. This should be the goal.
And yeah,
I want to jump in as devil's advocate for a second. Not that I've given this a whole ton of thought, but instead of making this into an echo chamber, I mean, the idea I can probably you can lay down a great case for why, according to the U.S. legal system or the laws in the United States, this shouldn't be. It's inconsistent. But let's take a step outside of law for a second and talk about Twitter and the internet as a platform for free speech, and free speech as a totally extreme, absolute idea, right? That anybody can express whatever they want. And there is no such thing, quote unquote, as incitement to violence, meaning even if I tell you go kill that Jew, it's your individual decision as a human being to go kill someone. So where does that come into play?
Do you
and
think
how do
beheading
you see it?
videos are also under freedom of speech?
I don't know. I don't know.
So
but I'm talking about incitement now. We're talking about
So I relate to both things. Incitement to terrorism or incitement to violence does have a limit. If it creates an imminent danger, it should be banned. So there is an exception for the freedom of speech when it comes to incitement to violence.
Yeah. According to U.S. law, again.
And also according to the Israeli law.
So how do you define that?
You can't.
Imminent danger.
You can't. Well, the test or the example is someone who calls fire in a cinema place. It's a closed place, and somebody calls fire, and the entire crowd gets out and rush out, and someone gets killed. So the rulings say that this person is liable for the incident, for the death of the person who was killed, and there is no freedom of speech in this instance. There is no defense of freedom of speech. Why? Because he should have known that by yelling fire, fire, he might cause a danger, might cause a disaster, and he did. But to come in advance and know exactly which call can create an imminent danger and what not, it's very, I would say it's impossible. And therefore, our allegation was not against the content, not against the speech. You can't define what speech should be allowed on social media and what speech should not. We claim that it's just about the use of the platforms as a tool in the operations of the terror organizations. The terror organizations should be banned from using social media. And on the flip side, the social media networks should ban the terror organizations from using their platform, because here you can control it. Facebook can know who's using their platform. Twitter can know who opens the accounts. This is very specific, very accurate, and it goes by the designated list of the State Department or Israel or any democratic state. You know exactly what is a terror organization and if it's using your platform. And yes, indeed, when we allege that YouTube helped ISIS, we came and prove and show that in the end of each movie, the ISIS called people to join them. And if you think about it, how people in Australia, in New Zealand, know about the opportunity to take a flight to Turkey, to cross the border to Syria and Iraq and join ISIS over there. Who would know about ISIS? Who would even care without these beheading videos? So this is what the social media platforms provided ISIS. It provided them with a tool that they could not do without recruiting militants and also raising funds and spreading their propaganda and spreading their ideology. And until today, maybe ISIS does not exist as an organization, but it surely exists as an idea.
And the social media companies, I guess, they claim that like we cannot possibly take responsibility on finding all the accounts and defining them and take them down. I mean, they go on this.
So they didn't go this way yet because they're immune. They don't have to respond or to answer the court.
They just say Section 230 and
yes,
it's like pleading the fifth.
Exactly. But once we pass the motion to dismiss...
This is what they'll say, probably.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I want to touch just for a few minutes about Israel, because there's a big caveat to everything we talked about, is you needed, quote-unquote, an American citizen involved. But most of the terror victims in Israel are not American citizens. So do you do lawsuits in Israel?
We have lawsuits in Israel. We have a lot of lawsuits in Israel. On behalf of hundreds of victims.
And how is Israeli court compared to American court?
It also takes years. Yeah. But unfortunately, and this is the big difference, the amount of compensations awarded in the Israeli court are petty compared to what the American courts give. The American court gives $10 million per plaintiff if you are a father or a mother that you lost a child. If you are a child that lost a parent, once again, you'll receive $10 million. If you are a brother that lost your brother, you'll receive $5 million, significant amounts. In Israel, all the siblings together will receive less than $1 million.
Because of the law or because the judges are...
Because the Supreme Court overturned a ruling of the district court and said that the ruling should be persistent to previous cases, not terror cases, just tort cases, and was too afraid to shake the system. Meaning, if they would grant or upheld what the district court awarded, that was 10 million shekels per victim, similar to what the United States are giving, but in shekels, not in dollars, it could reach tens of millions of shekels per case, which, they didn't write it, but which might bankrupt the Palestine Authority or bring it to a financial damage. And in order to protect the Palestine Authority, and by the way, protect other terror organizations like Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others, they limit the compensation.
To me, that's treason, what you're describing here. That's treason. You cannot comment. No?
Protecting terrorist organization over terror victims? Why?
Not everyone can tell you're being cynical. No, that's
sad.
It's really sad, and it's very frustrating. And we filed appeals on this ruling, unfortunately, with no success. So now we're going not to Congress, but to the Knesset to legislate a law that will award victims
there is no law.
Shekels.
They're going to name that move the Nitsana soon.
No, there is no law. I said the Supreme Court just just awarded whatever they thought fit. We feel different, and we are trying to pass a law now that will grant 10 million shekels per victim for the father, for the mother, for the brothers, whoever is filing the lawsuit.
Amen.
And what about suing? I'm thinking about now TikTok is the big hub.
Yes.
What about suing TikTok? Because TikTok have Israeli branch.
They
what about
do.
suing them in Israel?
Yeah, they do. And we are looking into these cases. TikTok is a Chinese company. They do have a branch in Israel, but yet we need to prove causation under the Israeli law, meaning that the specific TikTok episode
Video, yeah.
caused a terrorist to go and carry the specific attack that you're suing for. And it will be a little bit hard. In the United States, you don't have to go this road yet, although the Supreme Court did consider if it is secondary liability, you have to prove causation or not. It's still unruled, so we'll see. But in Israel, it's definite. So it's a little bit harder.
Wow. That's very
Incredible.
inspiring, but also frustrating.
But you're right.
also...
But you're right. That TikTok is number one cause for
now.
the Lions Den,
Lions Den.
Lions Den, and the Jenin brigades
Yeah.
for continuing on and slaughtering people.
Yeah.
And Hawara and in Ramot, in Jerusalem, and elsewhere, just because they're free to broadcast and to show and screen these horrific videos, encourage others to follow them.
Let's talk briefly about, like, I don't get it, Nitsana, because, like, you have a lot on your plate.
Yes.
You don't have a boring life, it seems to me. So, for people who don't know, Nitsana ran for the Knesset in the last elections a few months ago. She ran with Ayelet Shaked, the Yamina party. They didn't pass the threshold. I think you got like 60,000 votes, something like that.
Yeah.
Why?
It wasn't Yamina, it was Beit Yehudi.
Beit Yehudi, okay.
And Beit Yehudi asked me to join. Beit Yehudi did not run in the past election, the previous one, and felt that there is a sector in the population that want it to come back, and they needed people to run with it. I agreed to be number 2 in Beit Yehudi, and then we joined with Ayelet Shaked from Yamina.
Okay.
And ran the party. I felt that in Shurat HaDin, we reached obstacles that have to be dealt with in the national level. Harpoon, which I talked about, this is the book that we wrote, it is a unit that we worked with, no longer active because the government reduces the need for financial war against terrorism to almost zero. I believe that it has to be reinstated. I believe that Harpoon has to come back, and because only by fighting the money that goes to the terror organizations, you can really destroy their infrastructure. This is one thing. Another thing is a fight on behalf of the victims. We see, and this went on before the election, that the court does whatever they want because there is nobody to restrain it. So this is the type of doing that the Knesset should be doing, and I thought I can take and play a role. In other wars that we do in Shurat HaDin, fighting BDS, lawfare, fighting those who blame Israel for war crimes, the state did not do enough, and I thought to bring my experience, my talent, my knowledge into this fight on behalf of the state of Israel.
So you didn't give up the dream yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
and that
if I'm called again, I'll probably
okay.
go and fight.
Okay, you have the bug, as they say.
but you're waiting to be called.
Yes.
Meaning you don't have
yes.
you don't have like concrete plans.
As
yet.
we said, we have a full life and not a dull moment. So we'll continue the fight until then.
Wow, that's very inspiring story. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And the book, let's plug the book. Harpoon by Nitsana Darshan-Leitner.
Harpoon Inside the Covert War Against Terrorism's Money Masters. And you have another book on the way, you were telling.
Yes, that will be about Gonzalez versus Google.
Nice. Technology and high tech and
Terrorism.
Yes.
It's just a winning mix.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It really is. It's like Fauda and Silicon Valley in one.
But I guess in Harpoon, like if we just got a taste from I guess it has crazy stories, a lot of more stories.
Yes, it has all the operations. I mean, some of the operations, most of them were censored by the censorship, but a lot of operations that Harpoon took, everything by scamming Yasser Arafat and tricking Hezbollah's leaders and robbing banks in Judea and Samaria and bombing banks in Lebanon, and until assassinations, but not of the terrorists, but the money people in the terror organizations. Meir Dagan came with a declaration that there are no white-collar jobs in the terror organization. Everybody would be found accountable. Everybody is a target.
Fascinating. So guys, get the book. We'll put links. Also, it's on Kindle, on Amazon, all the places. And your organization accepts donations. Yes, definitely. And thank you for mentioning that. It's a non-for-profit based solely on donations, and it's tax deductible in the United States, in Canada, in Australia. Just go on our website and donate generously. Okay, so we'll put links, and it's, you're putting the money for a very good cause.
Very good use, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
really
coming.
fascinating.
We appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Bye, guys. See you on the next one.
Bye, next time.